I've been with exida for a little over a year now, and as you can see on the screen, I've got a long history of both IT and industrial control systems background. So it's an interesting mix that I've worked with in my career, and getting more interesting as the days go on. So what we're going to start with is, I'm sure you've seen this with every cybersecurity presentation that you've found, is a little bit of background with industrial control system security. We're not going to go over all the usual events and stuff. We're going to focus on what the assessment is, but we're going to go into a little background about industrial control system security. So what is industrial ICS security? Much like the environment of your enterprise, your email, your desktop, your web servers, and your home network, it's the prevention of unintentional or accidental or even intentional interference with your network. Somebody getting in and doing something that they shouldn't or you don't want them doing. The industrial control systems are a little more specialized because of the way they work, but what you're trying to prevent is the same type of thing, somebody from getting in and doing things to your network. ICS goes by a number of different names depending on the vendor, depending on your environment, depending on the industry. It can go by SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, Process Control Network, or PCN, IACS, Industrial Automation Control. So there's a lot of different names for the same thing. All of it boils down to your process and control system. I forgot to mention, I apologize, your end will be muted for the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll do question and answer using the Q&A bar at the top of the screen. So that way there's no background noise. Let me get the right thing. There we go. So some of the reasons that industrial control systems have become so vulnerable, and it's happened over the past, I would say, 10 to 15 years, is originally industrial control systems were comprised of proprietary buses, proprietary networks, proprietary components, point-to-point wiring. All of us remember the 4 to 20 loops, the HART, foundation field bus. They weren't connected to the commercial technology of Ethernet, the COTS technology. They didn't connect to standard switches. They didn't connect to routers. They didn't connect to Microsoft environments. They didn't use such foreign names as SQL and OPC and all this other stuff. As technology evolved and it became a necessity, people needed to see, or wanted to see, the trending, the information that's on the network, the information that the control system was generating. And so there was a very big push to incorporate enterprise integration. I want to see this from my boardroom. I want to see this from my office remote to my control system. And so there had to be connections somewhere. There had to be a connection back to the enterprise environment. Remote access used to be, if something was causing you problems at 2 o'clock in the morning, you got up, got dressed, and you went into the facility and changed the set point and then went home. Now, with remote access, you get up and you can do it in your pajamas. You can make the set point change. You can diagnose some problems if they're going on, have somebody replace something without ever leaving your house. Excuse me. So remote access has become an important component to industrial control systems. At the same time, it's become a very important but it's become important to do. And public information on how to damage a control system is published all over the internet. All right, I have one question that came in, and Marcus sent a note and said, I've come in, let me see. I thought topic would be an assessment, not an audit, but now it seems about security. The assessment is about cybersecurity, but we'll get to the assessment part of it in a second. There's always a background or a foundation that needs to be formed. So bear with me a minute. So how to get into the network? There are a myriad of ways of getting into the network. Ever since Ethernet became the technology of choice, remote access, remote connections, USB ports, CDs, VPNs, it has become any way that somebody could do something to an enterprise network, you can now do things to an ICS network because the ICS is operating. So why is security important? Control where your enterprise network runs important but not life-threatening components. If your email goes down, you may not know about a free lunch today. If your internet goes down, that's a bad thing. But if a control system goes down, the effects can be anything from uncomfortable to catastrophic. You could have production loss, service interruption, off-spec or dangerous products. Let's say a pharmaceutical company, somebody hacked their system and changed the setting, and too much or too little drug went into the drug. Not only could it be dangerous, if they found it happened, it could prompt a recall costing millions of dollars or more. Environmental releases, liquid, gases, no telling what could be released into the environment. All the way up to sickness, injury, and even death if something happens to your control system. And control systems, the control system equipment, and specifically PLCs, have been shown to be very susceptible or very sensitive to excessive network traffic. This network traffic can be everything from a targeted denial of service attack to too much activity going to a specific device to too much activity caused by other devices on the network. There's some redundant networking that causes a lot of broadcast traffic. That broadcast traffic, if it reaches a PLC, can cause a PLC to lock up, to corrupt, to shut down, to drop off the network and stop communicating. In all respects, you could lose visibility, you could lose control of your process. Never a comfortable situation to be in. So what is the difference between in IT, your enterprise security, versus industrial control system? Different priorities. With a general purpose IT system, confidentiality is the most important thing. You don't want to give out your secret recipe for classic Coke or KFC chicken or email or financial information or payroll information. The integrity of the network, you have to make sure what goes in comes out and what goes in doesn't get changed. And then the availability. Again, if the network goes down for a little bit, it's uncomfortable, it's a disruption, but it's probably not catastrophic. When you're talking about industrial control systems, the availability of the network is paramount. It's got to be running all of the time. The integrity of the network is extremely important. What goes in goes out. What you set something to comes out. The confidentiality of the network, while important, is generally not as critical. Generally, information flowing through an industrial control system is set points, is register values, is readings of a valve position. So if you sniff a network and somebody gets into your network unexpectedly and they look at information coming across an industrial control system, they may see a 22. Oh, well, taken out of context, there's no way to know what that 22 means. They may write a value, and it may be a bad thing, but generally it's a single value. So the information flowing on an industrial control system network, generally the confidentiality, the information is not valuable taken out of context. So there's different priorities between the two environments. From IT versus ICS, IT, it's got to be fast. You need to open your files, you need to get your email, you need your internet fast. Industrial control systems, it's got to be approaching real time in the millisecond or hundreds of millisecond response range. Again, the availability from occasional outages tolerated to it has to be running. It has to be available. It's got to be running the process and giving you visibility into your process. Confidentiality, data privacy is critical. ICS less so. One of the big things is technology. Every 3 to 5 years, 24 months is generally a laptop. You get a new system where you get some new environment installed or infrastructure installed. With ICS, there are systems that were installed 10, 20, 30 years ago that are still there running. They're still running the process unchanged, unpatched, unupdated. And that may cause a problem in itself because vulnerabilities have been found, but because it's difficult to update these systems because they can't be taken offline, the vulnerabilities are still there. They just know about them. Won't read the rest of the lines, but there's a large disparity between IT infrastructure and ICS infrastructure, where the ICS, more difficult to patch, harder to update, but it's got to be there all the time. It's sort of a conundrum. So the security starts at the automation products themselves. They're getting better. The vendors are putting cybersecurity into their products. They're becoming more aware because you, the end users, are demanding it. They have to do better. Part of the problem is what I just said. A system runs for 20, 30 years, never gets patched or updated. So no matter what they do, it'll never show up in the end systems. The suppliers are doing better, giving the information or giving the product upgrades, giving the information how to secure the products. System integrators are doing their part, recommending barrier devices, recommending equipment that has gone through some sort of a certification testing versus recommending equipment that the manufacturer just says, yeah, we're going to put it out like it is. And then the end user. The end user is becoming very aware that to account for cybersecurity at the beginning reduces their risk in the long term. What we use for an assessment generally is the ISA S99 series, which is now being renamed to the ISA IEC 62443. The general structure of the documents is showed here. It's laid out as categories, general policies, systems, and components, and then the documents within the categories, 1.1, 1.2, etc. The majority of the assessments that we do fall under the 2.1, the requirements for an ICS security and management system. That's where the normative statements come from. That's where the statements say you shall do this. They have some you should do this, which are the recommendations. But what we follow are the normative statements in 2.1. Some of the beginning statements or the beginning requirements is you need to select a risk assessment methodology. This is before a vulnerability assessment gets done, and you'll see why in just one second. The risk assessment is a high-level risk assessment. It looks at your environment at an enterprise level. It looks to see where your control systems lie. It tries to identify your control system at this point, and it identifies the most vulnerable or the most critical group or system, group of components or systems. Doesn't dig into detail of what those components are yet. But if you have 10 different sites with 30 control systems, you can't do it all at once. So what the high-level risk assessment does is it identifies which systems should be focused on and the cybersecurity applied to first. So you've done your high-level risk assessment. You've identified your system. The next step is a generic, simple network diagrams. What does your network look like? What's connected? Where your external devices are. So you develop simple, more functional than detailed network diagrams. Prioritize the systems. Which ones do we really need to work on first? Is there some low-hanging fruit that we could work on that gives us a benefit without a lot of time or money? Next step, perform a detailed vulnerability assessment, commonly referred to as a gap analysis. The vulnerability assessment compares known standards to what is in place or what is planned to be in place if you do it as a greenfield assessment. And this is where we're going to get into this. We've finally started on what the meat and potatoes of this presentation is. Because this assessment, when you come in the door, it's based on standards. But equally as important is that the knowledge and experience of the assessor when they come on site, driving to the site gives an idea of what's going on. Because part of the 62443 is physical, is environmental. It looks at where the site is, how did we get on, what was required. As we walk around, are doors unlocked, are things propped open, do people just open doors for us and let us in? All of these things are noticed and taken into account as part of the assessment. And all of this information leads to a successful assessment. A very high-level overview is phase one, the pre-assessment, and I'll get into more detail of all of this in a minute. We review a lot of the background documentation, a lot of the information that exists now. And we look through it all. We look at the network, what you have available for networking, so we know what we're getting into, so we know how the systems are laid out. Anything you can give us as far as configuration information, we look at that as well. Once we get on site, we begin talking to people. We begin figuring out what's going on in the environment. And that's how we do that's how we generate the documentation for the assessment. One thing that is extremely critical, and this is the basis of this presentation, is I came out of an FDA-regulated industry. We had auditors walk in the door, and we had a very rigid, documented audit procedure. When the auditor walked in the door, they had to identify themselves as an FDA auditor. The receptionist was instructed to put the auditor in a reception area conference room. They didn't want them walking around the facility to see anything. Once they got there and the receptionist called the director, all office doors got closed. Because when the auditor was brought to where they needed to be, they didn't want them looking at offices and seeing anything. When the announcement went out or when the director was called, all the group leaders were called. Nobody's to be walking around the facility. Everybody will be at their desk or at their workstation. Because they didn't want the auditor to have the opportunity to talk to regular employees out of script. And when they were meeting with the auditor, the answers were to be yes or no, no added information, no explaining, just simply answer what the auditor asked. It was essentially a confrontational environment. It was, the information was minimal. The information was, it was like pulling teeth for the auditor to get any non-scripted information. And the problem is, the other problem is, the auditor is looking only for things that were wrong. They're looking for things that they can write you up and fine you on. They're not going to document things you've done right. This encounter with the assessment is not an audit. The cooperation and the collaboration has got to be there to make this a successful encounter. And that's what we're looking for. We're not coming in to be confrontational. We don't want to be confrontational. We're not coming in to nail you. We're looking at the good and the bad, and we're documenting it objectively based on the standards. So what will happen? When we sign an agreement that we're going to work together, we need certain information to get us started. It's much easier looking at it not on site, because on site there's limited time to review stuff. So before we get there, it's very preferable to have any network diagrams, any network drawings, whatever state they're in. If they're on a napkin, that's fine. Send them to us. Policies, procedures, a list of policies and procedures. Again, these are industrial control system relevant, not general IT ones like about email. Although an email policy would be nice to have a list of just so you know you have it. A contact list of the people that we could contact and what their job functions are, so we know who to contact for what question. The physical address of the facilities we're going to visit, so we know how far they are. We can look them up on Google Maps and get an idea of what they look like. Any special requirements that we need to get, stay, visit, or do time on site, such as special clothing, fire retardant clothing, approved work boots, glasses, things like that can't be provided by the end company. Security or other clearances that we may need. Screening, such as drug screening, a background check, things like that. Site-specific training. Management or enterprise level approvals. I can tell you horror stories of showing up on site to do an assessment, and it took 2 or 3 days because we found out after we got there that we needed drug screening, background check, and then we had 2 or 3 days of training that we had to take in order to get on site. Well, we could have done all this in advance, had it done before we got there, and performed the on-site, and it would have been a lot more efficient and a lot more streamlined. So all this information makes the encounter much more streamlined, much easier, and much faster, to be honest. What we need once we get there, we usually give a presentation when we first arrive, introducing ourselves, telling everybody what we're going to be doing, so the people who are involved in this know who we are, know what we're doing, are able to ask any questions of us as we go through the process. So a general conference room with a video of some type so everybody can see our presentation. Some sort of a work or staging area where we can set our computers down and document the information, look at drawings, look at layouts, things like that. A home, away from home. Approvals for access into the facility. If we need to go into a certain area, is that approval in place? So we have to wait for it to happen for us. Vendor representatives. We've got this very special I/O, a very special remote access. Can we get a hold of the vendor or a control system that we have questions on? Is your implementation vendor available by phone or even available on site to ask certain questions of how a system was hardened, how a connection was made, how a firewall is configured that you don't have control over, things like that. We always require an escort for the duration of our visit. we don't actually touch or try not to touch any of the systems ourselves. We rely on the local expertise of the people on site. We show them what we're going to do, we let them get comfortable with it, and then we have them run the actual tests. So we don't go in and start touching and changing your system. We need that person to have the authorization to do what we need to do, and also the knowledge of the system that he's going to be looking at. Also convenient but not absolutely mandatory is internet connectivity, so that if we need to check on something or look something up, we can do it. That's not absolutely essential usually, because you can usually do it at the hotel, but it does make it easier and more streamlined if we can get it there. So the assessment steps that we follow. Generally, the standards are called out in the S99-62443, section 2.1. We go through all of these steps. We document all of these areas. And then we add a few more that we found are important to the comfort level of the hiring agency or the end user. So we do some things like we Wireshark the network of the different VLANs, if you have VLANs, to be able to get a reading on what the different traffic is, for example, and then give that as part of the report. So all of the questions that we're going to ask and all of the observations we're going to make exist in the 62443-2-1 series of documents. And again, this is collaborative. And these are what we ask. If you pull up the document, you'll see these main categories called out. So that, do you have a business? I'm going to go through what they actually are. It's not that many things. It's a lot of information that needs to be gathered, though, and a lot of expertise and knowledge to glean from the information you see what's actually been done a lot of times. So the business rationale. If something happened, what impact would that event have to your operation? What's the monetary? What's the health and safety? What's the environmental? All these things are part of the business rationale. Is it cheaper just to buy insurance and not do anything? And that's one of the first phases. What's part of the risk analysis? You do a high-level business rationale of what would happen to your system. Under the category of risk assessment, you do your high-level risk assessment, which identifies and prioritizes the systems you are going to target for the cybersecurity first, and then you move down through the targets. The vulnerability assessment, what we're talking about today, a gap analysis based on standards. I should have mentioned, and I didn't, but there are a number of industries that are regulated, such as nuclear, power, chemical. Those need to be assessed to a regulation, such as NERC-CIP, such as the NRC, such as CFAT, where other industries, there's no regulation in place yet. It's recommendations and standards. What the goal is that as these industries become regulated, and at some point in time they will, you're ahead of the curve if you've already had an assessment done to the ISA series of documents. Because if you read the other documents, the nomenclature is a little different, the verbiage is a little different, but the end result is the same. They all go over the same major categories and what you need to accomplish. So, after you've done the gap analysis, the vulnerability assessment, the output of that tells you where you deviate from standards. That can actually be used as an input to the detailed risk assessment, which you go in component by component and say, if something happened to this, what would happen? What could happen? How can we prevent it? How good have we done preventing it? And that's a proctored event to do a detailed risk assessment. It's a multi-day proctored exercise. It can get rather complex, and we have people that proctor that as a cybersecurity risk assessment. We have people that do that and are very, very good at it. So organization and awareness. Cybersecurity management system, the scope of it. You can't protect it all. So as part of the exercise, have you defined the boundaries of the system that we're going to do this time? And then there's going to be another one that you're going to do next time. But you've got to define the scope, because you can't do everything all at once. You'll never finish it, or you won't put the detail in for the information that you need. Then organize for security. Do you have a group in place that crosses functional boundaries that all have a say into cybersecurity awareness and cybersecurity prevention? part of that group should be management, should be HR, should be finance, should be control systems, so that when they look at it, you're not just looking from a very focused point of view like cybersecurity, like industrial control systems. So you get a very balanced opinion of how you can control these things. But remember, the end result of this is a control system. The people involved with control systems are key stakeholders in this. Staff training and awareness. Do you have a training plan in place? Is it documented? Do you document the results of it? Do you test it to make sure it's effective? Business continuity. If our system goes down, can the enterprise, can the facility, can the operation survive? How long can it survive? What can we do to get it back up and running in as short a time frame as possible? And what is that time frame? And what needs to be running? What people are needed to make this done? Security policies. First we look at, because we generally provide in advance, what policies are available. Then we go and look at which ones are missing and how relevant the policies we've been provided are to industrial control systems. There's a lot of IT policies. Don't reinvent the wheel on this stuff. IT is a very mature environment. They've written a lot of policies on a lot of things. Use those as your basis for creating industrial control system. Either modify them and make them your own, or add to theirs so that the single policy covers both environments. Both ways work. Realize that if you do your own, you have more control over them. If you incorporate them into the IT policies, you have a much broader policy in place. So it can, and only one you have to know because you have a single policy for IT. Because control systems, if you have email on your second system, you still have to worry about your IT policies. So you may have two you have to worry about and be familiar with. Both ways are acceptable. It depends on the environment you're in. Selected countermeasures, personal security. Have your people been screened? Have your vendors been screened? Have your consultants or contractors been screened? Physical environment. Clean, secure, and safe. Is your environment set up to be a clean, secure, and safe control system environment? Went on site close to a year ago, and there was very little controls as far as the physical, and there was a layer of dust that had been sucked into all those computers. It's going to cause a shortened lifespan and probably erratic behavior of the computer systems. Is it an attack to the network? No, not at all. Does it make the system unstable? Not right now, but there's a very good chance it could in the future. So have a controlled environment. Have filtered air, clean air, things like that going into your environment. Part of the ISA, the 62443 documents, covers physical and environmental safety and cleanliness and environmental in general as part of the assessment. Network segmentation. This is probably one of the biggest ones where critical assets are separated. The protocols are limited. The amount of information getting to and from a controller is only what that controller needs. The amount of information getting to a historian are only the protocols that historian needs. There's no direct connection between the enterprise and the control system. It goes through a DMZ or a jump box or a similar situation. Access control, I'll hit all three. Administration, authentication, and authorization. Are the accounts established and deleted in a timely and controlled and documented manner with approvals? When somebody authenticates, does it guarantee that that person is unique as the person that they say they are? And the authorization, do they only have access to what they need in order to accomplish their job? Addressing risk. Select and deploy countermeasures to maintain. Make sure that what you do, and complementary countermeasures. Don't go off and select something that nobody has ever seen before thinking security through obscurity. If you have something that you lock the door, you lock the controller, you lock down the network, make sure everything plays into each other. Whenever you do cybersecurity, you're also looking at health, safety, and environmental. Everything should play in. The best cybersecurity prevention in the world is essentially useless if somebody can walk up and plug a USB or a network cable into your devices. They have direct access. So make sure everything flows together, works together, complements each other. New systems, when they're put on, or updates to the current system, are evaluated. Does this change? Do we need to reassess? Do we need to look at what else this could impact. One of the biggest gaps we usually see, besides the network segmentation, is documentation management. The documents should be classified. The documents should be protected based on their classification. In other words, should they be encrypted at rest? Should they be encrypted in transit? Should further authorization be required to get to a certain series of documents? I was on site and I was sent a document that had every username and password for every network device in their environment. And the first question I asked is, when this is sitting in your repository, is it encrypted? Do you need a second step to open it up? The answer was vague, so I'll just move on. Incidents reporting and response. Should something happen, you identify both successful and failed attempts. Sometimes a failed attempt is more important. When to report it? I mean, is it general internet chatter, or is someone attacking you from the same IP address all the time? Or is it internal? Is somebody sort of probing your network a little bit? Who should you tell? And what are they assigned to do? If you tell somebody this is happening, there should be a process and a procedure. This is what you need to do. Call management. Call the civil authorities, local police. Call the FBI. It goes to all levels where you need a document saying, this is what I'm supposed to do, should I be told something is going on, and you need to have a document saying, this is who you tell. Monitoring and improving. Is this management system being followed? Are process changes being documented? Are they being assessed? Should a reassessment be done? And is there an audit going on? A real audit. Remember, this is an assessment. So is there an audit procedure in place to say, we are going to check to see if everything is being done the way we said it's being done? And then review and maintain. Are the security objectives being met? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Have we reduced our risk exposure? What would change? What would force a change to our management system? Upgrading from a non-proprietary to an Ethernet control system. Well, that's going to change your entire environment. We need to change the cybersecurity management system to reflect those changes. What triggers a review of procedures? Does the process need to be reassessed to make sure it's still doing what it's supposed to do? And this is generally about a 2 to a 3 day process to walk around, to talk to people, to look at information, to gather the information. And what comes out of this process is essentially a gap analysis, giving detailed items of what the current state or what the proposed state is, if this is a greenfield, versus industry best practice or industry standards. Recommendations on how to move from where you are now to what those industry standards are. Information and opportunities that we can work together with exida, working with you to do some of these enhancements. Documentation generation, review of the documentation, network segmentation, the Bay Area devices, training and commissioning, networking training. There's a large gap I've noticed that control system people, workers, don't always have in-depth networking knowledge. And then again, the output of the vulnerability assessment can be used as the input to the risk assessment. So, the information that we gathered during the vulnerability assessment, it absolutely can't be gathered without the absolute cooperation of the plant personnel. We're not out to nail you against the wall, as an audit is generally tends to do. We're not there to just find fault. We're not there to find what you've done wrong and then write it up like that. We also document what you have done right and what you are moving towards, which is the right direction to be moving towards. And we fully document that as well. I was at another assessment where they did everything right. They did an amazing job. Their one fault that I found is they developed a network technology so complex that only one guy knew how it goes together, knew how to configure it, and knew how to program the switches and routers to make changes to it. He was the fault. He was the single source of failure. My biggest recommendation is make sure that there's a succession plan for him, because he needs to be able to take a vacation. He needs to win the lottery. So when we're there, the last thing we want is to be in some sort of a confrontational environment. We cannot get the information that we need to give to you in a formatted manner, comparing against a gap, if we don't get the gray answers along with the black and white answers. And it's the gray answers that make the biggest difference. So I'd like to thank you for your time. That pretty much runs through everything I wanted to talk about. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box up on the corner. I'll answer them as best I can. I'll give a couple minutes for anybody that wants to type any in. For those that don't, I appreciate your time with us this morning. We'll be running this again at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. So I'll wait for anybody that wants to type stuff in and see if I have any questions. All right, I don't see any questions coming in. If you're typing something, type just a quick, I'm writing, so I know you're writing something if it's a longer question. I don't have anything coming in. So if you do have any questions, feel free to contact, why, thank you, Marcus. Marcus was the one that asked earlier, I thought this was about assessment, but you're doing security. And he just answered, thanks a lot. I understand why you started with security. I appreciate the follow-up. Thank you very much. Like I said, you've got to have a foundation, and why we're doing this. This isn't just for fun, even though it's fun doing it. It gives you a handle on what you have and where you need to be. So, if there aren't any more questions, I wish you all a very, very good day. Thank you for spending the time with me this morning. And if you do have any questions, you can contact the info email at Exida, and they'll get it to me. So, again, thank you very, very much, and have a great day.